Welcome. This is Dr. Khan, and today's topic is inflation and unemployment. These are two very critical macroeconomic variables and concepts, and these two concepts are, are associated with many aspects of our lives and livelihoods. The learning objectives of this chapter are as follows. I will define the concepts of labor force, the labor force participation rate, and the unemployment rate. Then I will distinguish between cyclical, structural, and frictional unemployment. Then I will describe the costs of unemployment. And then I will go on with discussing how the consumer price index is calculated. And then we'll also touch upon the distinction between inflation and the price level. So the unemployed people are those individuals who do not currently have a job but are actively looking for work. So please note this part, that actively looking is a very vital aspect of this definition of unemployment. If the person is not actively looking but otherwise unemployed for a long time, we may not consider that person as unemployed, and instead we may consider that person as a member of a discouraged group of people who are not looking for job, or discouraged workers. So we will come back to the discouraged workers concept in greater detail in few minutes, but before that, just quickly see how the labor force is calculated as well as how the unemployment rate is calculated. So the labor force is basically when we subtract the discouraged workers from the total population, we get labor force. So when we discourage workers, when we discount the discouraged workers from the total population, then we have number of employed people as well as number of unemployed people in the economy. So who are discouraged workers anyway? The discouraged workers are composed of the people who are very young, like very minor babies, and then super seniors who are retired or who are institutionalized, maybe for long-term care, or maybe institutionalized in any in the correction facility system, or even full-time students who are preoccupied with full-time studies and therefore are not available for offering their labor in the labor force. So the minors, the seniors, the institutionalized persons, as well as the discouraged workers who stopped looking, all of them belong to this group who are not part of labor force. So then, who are the part of labor force? The part of labor force are employed people who are currently on the payroll and unemployed people who are currently not on the payroll as well as not self-employed. And of course, we have already subtracted that special groups of people from the total population. Those are minors, seniors, institutionalized people, as well as discouraged workers. And then the unemployment rate calculation is pretty straightforward once we have figured out the labor force size. So once we know the labor force size is, then we put the labor force size on the denominator, and then we put the number of unemployed people, including self-unemployed. Those people are on the numerator, and then we multiply that fraction with 100 for percent. So that's how we calculate unemployment rate as a percent of labor force. So labor force participation rate is the percent of population over 16 years of age that is in the labor force. So that's a more formal definition of labor force participation rate. So labor force participation rate is labor force on the numerator, and the denominator is population 16 years of age and older times 100 will give us the labor force participation rate. Now we will see how we calculate the unemployment rate on this example using the 2012 US data. So the total civilian population of US civilian population in the year 2012 was 242.6 billion, and then I'm sorry, it's 242.6 million, and out of which the people who are minors and seniors and institutionalized, as well as discouraged workers who stopped looking for job, who stopped looking for job actively for a longer period of time. These are the people who are not in the labor force. So these kind of people are almost like 88 million people. So out of 242.6 million people, 87.89, so there's roughly 88 million people are not in the labor force. That's the sky blue, the light blue segment of this column. The light blue segment of this column is the part of people who are not part of the labor force. And then the remaining people are in the labor force, which is 154.7 million people. So out of these many people, the number of employed people are indicated by the green bar, which is representing 142.034 million people, and unemployed people are represented by this orange rectangle here, which is representing 12.67 million people. So let's recall our unemployment rate formula, where the number of unemployed people are on the numerator and the denominator is the labor force, and then times 100 for percent, and that's how we get in 2012 March the US unemployment rate was 8.2%. Now, so this graph is suggesting that unemployment rate can vary widely across not only developing countries but also across developed countries, so-called industrialized OECD countries. So we see that in this on this graph, the Spain's unemployment rate was 23.6%, and the second highest unemployment rate of those industrialized countries at that period of time was France, 10%, then Italy, 9.3%, then United Kingdom, 8.4%, then United States, 8.3%. So remember, those were a high unemployment rate time. That was around 2012. And then we're looking at that how the unemployment rate is calculated, and how the labor force participation rate is responded to across genders. So in the 1948, the labor force participation rate for women of 20 years of age and older were 32%. In other words, 32% of those women, including this age group, participated in a paid work environment, including self-employed work environment. But by 1970, this number had grown to 43%, and by 1997, it had reached 60% of those women participated in the labor force. This trend reflected the remarkable change in our economy and society, that women dramatically increased their participation in the labor force. And then there was a time in one of the recent recession time that one of the magazine, I think The Economist, the cover page was that at that particular period there were more women on the labor force than men at that point in time. So the discouraged workers are workers who left the labor force because they could not find job and they kind of have given up. So these are the people we kind of discounted them from the labor force calculation, and again those are the people on this graph on the right side here, and that's the 0.86 million people were discouraged worker out of those people who out of this US Department of Labor data of 2012. Then unemployment has also some sectoral, some ethnic dimension also, or some other demographic dimensions as well. So in this graph it shows that in 2012, while the total unemployment rate was 8.2, out of that, in males 20 years or older, among that demographic group, the unemployment rate was 7.6. Then the females 20 years and older, among this demographic group, the unemployment rate was 7.4. then the both sexes combined between the ages of 16 and 19-year-old, the unemployment rate was 25%. The all white people, the Caucasian people, the combined, the unemployment rate was 7.3. All African American people combined, the unemployment rate was 14%. White people between 16 and 19 years of age, among that age group, the unemployment rate was 22.5%. And the African Americans between 16 and 19 years of age, the unemployment rate was 40.5%. The married men, among them, the unemployment rate was 5.1%. Married women, unemployment rate was 5.3%. And the women's maintaining families, among them, the labor force participation rate was about 89.2, which means that time unemployed women were 10.8%. So now some economists, for example, economists David Otter and Mark Duggan, they studied the impact of federal disability insurance programs impact on labor force participation, and they found that due to this program, some people might have chose to take this disability benefit and might have withdrawn themselves from the labor force. And according to that paper, that this disability insurance program might have decreased the measured unemployment rate by 0.5%, which is a pretty significant large effect. Because when there is a generous disability effect, disability insurance program out there, some people may choose to withdraw themselves from the labor force and therefore are not get counted anymore in the labor force, and thus unemployment rate might have been looked smaller because now the labor force size is smaller. So in that sense, those kind of social program, entitlement program may understate the actual unemployed percentile. Now we're going to discuss the difference between cyclical unemployment, frictional unemployment, and structural unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is the unemployment that occurs during fluctuations in real GDP. Over time, the economy has some recession and the recovery, and it goes through the phases of bust and boom, trough and peak. So sometimes unemployment goes up during when economy is booming. The unemployment goes down when the economy is booming, and when unemployment goes up when economy is receding. So those are due to cyclical effect of the economy. And the frictional unemployment occurs when in the economy the people are between the jobs because of the natural workings of the economy, or because might be their current job skill kind of got obsolete and needed to be retrained. So in the natural working of the economy, there is a constant friction between the new technology and old technology, new job demands and versus the old job demand, etc., etc. And also people's dream job definition might change over time, and people do travel and take up new jobs, and for some other reasons also they become temporarily unemployed, or they call it between the jobs. So those are all somewhat natural workings of the economy, and when people are unemployed due to that time or due to that reason, and when a qualified worker is just waiting it out to wait for their dream job to come along, or the employer is waiting, increasing their recruiting effort to find out that right person. So either way, when they wait, and those kind of situation are also causing some unemployment, causing some friction, and those kind of unemployments are called frictional unemployment. And the structural unemployment refers to the situation when there is a mismatch of skills and jobs, and the economy has like a structural shift of the economy. So if one particular sectors of job has become like outsourced because of some economy's fundamental changes in the demand of the skills needed, that can cause an unemployment. that could be structural. And also some economists say that structural unemployment can occur when some external forces alter the labor demand, labor supply situation, such as if there is a binding minimum wage enforcement where that is above the going market wage. In that case, also there could be some unemployment because some employer may respond by hiring fewer workers, or if there is a unionized pressure on a labor force where collective bargaining is pushing the wages to be agreed upon at a higher level than what it would have been under a free market negotiation. In that case, also employer may respond by hiring fewer workers. So those are some examples of structural unemployment. And of course, one of the big examples is that when there is a fundamental mismatch between the skills and the jobs are out there. And the natural rate of unemployment refers to the level of unemployment when there is no cyclical unemployment. That means economy is not in any extreme situation of any boom or bust. Economy is in a normal mode, but still there are some people unemployed. So these are like natural rate of unemployed. So these are the people who are unemployed due to only fractional unemployment reason as well as the structural unemployment reasons as discussed previously. And the full employment level of unemployment is that level at which economy's unemployment rate is equal to its natural rate. So in a normal situation, not 100% people, even not 100% people of a labor force will be on the payroll or on either as an employed or self-employed mode at any given time, because some people will be traveling, some people will be taking up a new job. For those particular reason, there could be some people out of the workforce, but this would still be considered as a full employment level unemployment rate because it will never be 100% per se, because some people will be always traveling or some other practical reasons. Few people will be out of work at any given point in time, even though in the best situation of the economy that will be the case. So this is an example of unemployment insurance payments to unemployed people for say US 2012 data. So fewer than 5 weeks of unemployed people at that time, the 20.6% unemployed people were like that. 22% of the unemployed who claimed unemployment insurance, they were experiencing a spell of from 5 weeks to 14 weeks of unemployment. Then 14.9% of the unemployed people were experiencing the unemployment spell anywhere from 15 weeks to 26 weeks. And then 42.5% of the unemployed people were unemployed 27 weeks or longer period of time. That was the case in 2012. So this is an interesting British study that shows that peer effect is a very important thing in inspiring people to search for job, and peer effect can also be decreasing when other peers are out of work. So the people will be more unhappy if an unemployed person find out that the peers are already working but that person is unemployed, and the person will be more aggressive to find job when they know the peers are working. But if the peers are also not working, they are also unemployed, that may kind of decrease people's motivation to search for job aggressively, and they may kind of slow down in the job search process. They feel like consolation. It's like a ironic consolation that okay, my peers are also out of work, so I'm just one of them, so I'm no worse than them. So that's an interesting human psychology or peer effect on job search intensity. So now we are going to discuss the consumer price index. Consumer price index refers to a price index that measures the cost of a fixed basket of goods chosen to represent the consumption pattern of a typical consumer. So the CPI index for a given year, say year K, is defined as the cost of a basket of goods and services necessary for a decent human living for a family of 4 or for individual, however you measure it, and then how much it costed to have that buy those many goodie bags, that many stuff containing the housing, the healthcare, the the groceries, the recreation, the basic stuff, the education. So what are the basic things we need for a decent human living, a basic human living? And if we put that those expenditure items on the numerator, and how much it actually cost of those items, and so put the price tag on the bottom of the on the denominator, and then time that with 100, then we'll get the consumer price index. In other words, um, we first find out a base year and how much that goodie bag will cost us for that base year. That valuation we put on the numerator, and on the denominator, uh, uh, I'm sorry. So the CPI is measured as CPI in a particular year, K, is measured as how much that goodie bag would cost us in year K over how much the goodie bag costed us in the base year times 100, and that's for percent. And in the so what they will be facing in California, Los Angeles. So in that case, the employee might be needing some cost of living adjustment, and probably they'll find out the consumer price index, the goodie bag they used to enjoy in South Carolina, the same goodie bag will probably cost significantly more in Los Angeles, California, and that will indicate what percent more that would be, so that the appropriate employer can look into or consider a cost of living adjustment. So just to keep the employee in the same standard of living, they have to give some more money for that person to live in Los Angeles to enjoy the same basket of goods and services, same level of, the housing, healthcare, recreation, transportation, etc. You need more money in LA than in, let's say, South Carolina. So this application is talks about that a, a fixed goodie bag based measure of consumer price index can sometimes be uh, can sometimes have some bias in the CPI measure. So for example, how large is the bias in the CPI due to not immediately incorporate new good? So new goods are coming out in the marketplace all the time, but a fixed goodie bag uh, based CPI measure, consumer price index measure, may not consider those consumers' well-being or standard of living boosting due to using of a new product, not necessarily at a higher price. So for example, maybe if the fixed goodie bag based CPI measure was done when there were no cell phone, and then cell phone now came up in the marketplace, and a lot of time probably your cell phone monthly bill can be similar to, in a lot of markets, cell phone bills can be similar to the landline bill. So in that case, uh, a consumer can easily get a cell phone with that kind of money, and probably will be feeling a more benefit. Probably their standard of living will be having a boost because they will have more mobility, and they will have communication connectivity while on the go. So probably that would increase their standard of living, but a fixed goodie bag based CPI does not take into consideration of that. And according to Jerry Hausman of MIT, uh, this cell phone introduction of 1983 that resulted in an upward bias of the telecommunication component of the CPI of 0.8 to 1.9%. So basically, the communication cost component was having an upward bias. The reported increase in telecommunication prices during this period might have actually been a decrease of 0.8%. Room air conditioners also took 15 years to be included. So ACs might have been introduced uh, 15 years ago when it was, but if the CPI measuring people started to use that as part of a decent living equipment, then there would be a mismatch between those standard of living measurement if they fail to incorporate the benefit of introduction of new goods in real time or soon thereafter, as opposed to waiting for 15 years before they include that kind of amenities as part of a decent living focused goodie bag or good basket combination. Since new products are constantly being introduced, the bias in the CPI can be large unless they have updated their formula to in real time include those new products into the goodie bag. Now, inflation rate. The percent rate of change in the price level is called inflation rate. So inflation rate equals percent rate of change of a price index. So over time, the historical US inflation rate is seen to be, this is from 1875 through 2000, and we see that historical US inflation rate spiked from the mid 1980s, and that the green curve becomes steeper from there on. But first remaining relatively flat for the first 60 years, the price level began to steadily increase after the Second World War. The price of a postage stamp in 1940 and 1912 would illustrate the change in the overall price level also that might have occurred. So 3 cents in 40 and 2012 45 cents. So that's a proxy of price level increase or inflation also. So there is another snapshot of how inflation worked historically. So gasoline in 1940s was 18 cents a gallon, and of course at 2012 it was 3.65. However, now it is a little bit less in the past couple of years. So then loaf of bread in the 1940s it was 8 cents, and in 2012 it was $3.59. So that gives you what percent of an increase is that when 8 cents become 3.59. Gallon of milk was 34 cents, became $3.49. That gives you an approximate idea of what percent the price have increased. Postage stamp from 3 cents to 45 cents in 2012. Houses were 6,550 on average to 350,000 in 2012. That tells you what percent of an increase is that. Cars on average 800 to it increased to 22,000. That gives you a proxy of inflation rate change. Haircut in New York City was 50 cents in 1940s, and then $50 in 2012. So that gives you a proxy. Then movie tickets in New York City, 25 cents in 1940s to $12 in 2012. So that's a huge jump. And the men's tweed sports jacket in New York City was 15 cents. I mean $15 in 40s and became 189 in 2012. The men's tweed sport jacket in New York City, that was we talked about that, and the snake tattoo on arm that could have been made by spending a quarter on 1940s, but now it will take $80 in New York City to get it done. Again, the source is Scott Dirks, The Value of a Dollar, 1860 through 1989. That's the book, came out in 1993. Okay. So inflation reached its highest peaks in the post-war era during the decades of 1970s, when the economy was hit with several increases in oil prices, called oil price shock, right? So after those wars, there was this oil price shock and spiked the prices. In recent years, the inflation rate has been relatively low. The perils of deflation. So deflation is the opposite of inflation. That's a negative inflation or falling prices of goods and services. Anticipated inflation is inflation that is expected, that people can expect that Federal Reserve Bank, the Central Bank of America, is going to increase sub-interest rate, and of course the commercial banks will follow through, and overall probably the things will go up through that way because of interest rate hike, or maybe due to the oil price shock, or for other reasons things will get more expensive. So if people can anticipate those things which are coming, and those kind of price level hike is called anticipated inflation. And when the price rises unexpectedly for the member of public, general member of public has no clue when it will happen, or they just have only find it out only after it has happened. That's called unanticipated inflation, inflation that was not expected. Now, so there are some costs associated with inflation. One of the cost of anticipated inflation is menu cost. So a lot of sellers send out the mail-in coupons, the mail-in catalogs, and in the stores we walk out, we know their price tags are hanging on the wall. They might have printed many million dollars on advertising on the billboard and the flyers and social media and newspaper ads stating a price. So they put out those menus, and if the inflation causes them to change the price, they have to reprint all the menus, all the documentation, all the ad, all the coupons. That will cost. That's called menu cost. The costs associated with changing prices and printing new price tags, price lists, when there is inflation, that's called menu cost. So that cost is there. They got shoe leather cost. If price goes up, people need more cash, so they have to make more trips to the bank teller or to the ATM. So either they are working their shoes leather, or if they're driving more often to the drive-through ATMs, in that case their tire. The tire will it will depreciate faster, right? So the costs of inflation that arise from trying to reduce holding of cash is called shoe leather costs. Unanticipated inflation. So hyperinflation is one of those unanticipated inflation. In the recent eras, so Zimbabwe had experienced it. In the recent eras, Brazil had experienced it. Argentina did experience hyperinflation. At one point, Italy experienced hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is the rate which is more than 50% per month. When inflation is jumping more than 50% per month, that situation is referred to in the textbook as hyperinflation. So in this chapter, we have discussed consumer price index, cost of living adjustment, also known as COLA. Remember, when the guy is transferred from South Carolina to Los Angeles, California, with the same salary, then he reminded the authority or the management that that is essentially a pay cut for me, because over there, unless you are giving me a cost of living adjustment, keeping me on the same salary would mean I'm actually taking a real income cut. Because if the same goodie bag that I enjoy in South Carolina, but I will not be able to afford that in California with the same salary. So I need cost of living adjustment. Then the cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment, we discussed that this is the unemployment rate when this is tied to the boom and bust cycle of the economy. When economy is booming, unemployment rate is low, historic low, and economy is on the bust, on the trough, then unemployment rate is historic high. Those rates are tied to cyclical unemployment. Then deflation, we said this is a negative. It's a negative price hike. In other words, when price is falling, that's a situation called deflation, as opposed to inflation, which refers to price increase. Discouraged workers are the workers. They, for some reason, has given up. They have stopped looking for job actively, or looking for self-employment opportunity actively. So these are the people not counted in the labor force. And the other groups not counted in the labor force are the minors, the retired people, the people who are institutionalized in the healthcare facilities or any redemption facilities, etc., and then full-time students who are so much into the studies that they really don't have time to offer their labors in the wage market or self-employment market. And the frictional unemployment refers to a situation where the economy is having the natural friction between the old skill and the new skill, old job situation versus the new job dynamics. People are between the job, the definition of dream job has changed, or for those reasons, so there is a constant friction in the economy. And due to those friction, if people are unemployed, we refer to those unemployment as frictional unemployment. And then full employment. Full employment refers to a situation where economic unemployment rate is at its natural rate. That's the full employment level of unemployment. And the hyperinflation is the inflation which is increasing 50%. Prices are rising 50% per month or more, at a rate 50% or more per month. And then, of course, labor force is the part of the population that is employed as well as unemployed. In other words, labor force include the employed and unemployed people, but ignores the discouraged workers as well as the minors, the super seniors, the retirees, the incarcerated people, and the other kind of institutionalized people. And then menu costs refer to the cost of anticipated inflation. When due to the price change, they have to now change their menu, their mail-in coupon, and their price tag, the price list. When they have to reprint them to reflect the new price, that's a cost. It's called menu cost. And natural rate of unemployment is the rate when there is no cyclical unemployment, only structural and frictional unemployment is there. And of course, the structural unemployment is the unemployment situation when economy has a major structural shift. Either the one sector has become outsourced, or that sector's this particular skill become obsolete, or maybe due to the trade union bargaining or minimum wage enforcement, the labor market wage rate has been structurally changed, and as a result employers may be responding to by hiring fewer people, and that can lead to an unemployment, and that those all would be an example of structural unemployment. So with that note, if you have any particular question about this review of this chapter of inflation and unemployment, please shoot me an email. Then I'll be happy to respond to you, or you can just comment underneath the YouTube link and I can get back with you that way too. Thank you very much for your patience, and I look forward to hearing from you and interacting with you through YouTube. Thank you very much.